Sure.
Well, people have asked if when they saw the pie on my first video for the students, that would I make a cooking video about how to make a pie from start to finish. So I'm going to start with the apples. These apples are, they're crisp and they're great to, and they're kind of thin. I cut them as thin as I can. And these are Empire apples, but it depends on what part of the country you live in and what apples you have to buy in your grocery store. This apple I always use either Macintosh or Jonathan, or these are Empires. But there's all kinds of apples out there, and you know what's good in your neighborhood. So let's get started first. And the most challenging part of making a pie, I think, is the crust. And I learned from my mother, and I do it the way she did it. And I know some people use food processors and other things, but I just use some old-fashioned methods. So we're going to start with 2 cups of flour, and I am using the recipe that you get. Is it 1? And 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to have a teaspoon of salt put in with this. And this is my own addition, is I put just a little bit of sugar. I don't know why, but I do it, and I think it helps. So I'm going to sift these together. And no particular reason, as I like the feel of the flour after it's been sifted. So 2 cups of flour, all-purpose flour. Be sure you don't get self-rising or something like that. This just happens to be organic, because right now we get whatever we can get in the store because they don't have everything that you want. And then I'm going to use 3/4 a cup of Crisco. I'm using these sticks, and the reason I use the sticks is because they're easy to measure. They're in tablespoons, so that it's really easily marked. So this one is one that we had before. It's a half, and then I'll add 1/4, and we'll have 3/4 a cup of Crisco. Other people use butter and other things, but I use Crisco. Now you can buy Pillsbury crusts, and they're really very good, but I just enjoy making it myself, and I think it's really, well, it's just fun. So what we're going to do is we have the flour, the salt, a little bit of sugar, and the Crisco, and then what we're going to do, and this is the way my mother and her mother before her on the farm in Kansas, what they did is they took 2 knives and they cut the shortening into the flour by using the 2 knives. And my mother used to tell me that you want the shortening to be about the size of a pea, small amount. Now, some people recommend doing this by hand, and I've seen people do it by hand, but you just want to incorporate the Crisco into the flour, because that's what's going to hold it together. You can see they're kind of small. The shortening has been broken down and incorporated with the flour. Okay, now I'm going to this is where the recipe books sometimes say 4 to 8 tablespoons of ice water. This is just water with ice cubes in it. I have never been able to make it work with that small, so I usually use 8. But I start with about 4 tablespoons of water, and then I take a fork and I just try to, we want it to stick together, get it wet. So I'm going to do a few more. I always do more than they say, and it works out just fine. So Just going to put one more in for good measure. Sure that it... Now these amounts are for a double crust pie, so I'm making 2 crusts. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to form 2 balls of crust, and I just do that with my hands. I just put it together, and I want to use all of it. And then I'm going to wrap it in saran wrap and put in the refrigerator to chill for a little bit. So I'm just wrapping this up in saran wrap, which I will then use when I roll out the dough. So here's one. If you have too much water, and then it's going to be, it's not going to be light and flaky. And my mother always said, you don't want to touch it a lot because then it gets tough.
Oh.
So you don't, so you're careful. So I pretty much have used all of it. It's a little flaky here, but got some that didn't quite make it. But so I've got a top crust and a bottom crust. I'm going to put it in the fridge. And I think they say in the back is where it's the coolest.
Okay.
Back here, hiding behind the orange juice. And I'll clean up some of this and get ready for the next piece. All right, here we have the apples, and I'm going to add a little sugar. Now I have made an apple pie that has no sugar in it at all, and you sometimes can't even tell the difference because apples are so sweet that you can make a sugarless apple pie if you have someone that can't have sugar. But I just put a little bit. This is I just sprinkle the sugar, and I don't have any rhyme or reason for it, just what looks right. And some cinnamon, and most people like a lot of cinnamon. It's a nice, brings out the flavor of the apples. And I got a message from an old friend who saw my making my pie, and she suggested that I add some lemon zest and lemon juice. So I'm going to add a little lemon. I've done that with lime before, but I haven't done it for a while. So we'll just put a little lemon, squeeze it, and then I add just a touch. You have to be careful with nutmeg because it's strong. So just a touch. And oh boy, that smells good. So this is the filling. And now we're going to get to the best part, which is rolling out the crust. This one looks like it's a little bigger, so I'll use that for the bottom. And I had always used to use the rolling pin right on the dough, but Catherine Frazier and Adrian Dominican was stranded here one time in the wintertime when she was a novice, and we decided to bake pies, and she taught me this method, and I think a lot of people use it, but it makes it a lot easier. So now I'm going to try and roll this out, and want to make it big enough to fit the bottom of the pie pan. This is a fairly deep pie dish, so I need to get it a little bigger so it will. People that have fancy kitchens have a marble countertop that they could do it on, but and I don't like to mess up our beautiful tablecloth, so I use a piece of parchment paper. But saran wrap underneath and saran wrap on top. Let's see if this looks like it's going to fit. Okay. All right, this is where it gets a little tricky. I don't want it to fall apart. Ah, that looks good. turned out really well. And these little pieces that fallen off the edge here, I'm just going to put them on here, like so. Pinch this up. Where's that knife? Okay, that looks nice. And then I'm going to add our that looks good. Set this aside and this, and we'll get the next one here. It's all practice. The more you do it, the better it gets.
That my favorite Joan Apple Pie is the mango pie.
Oh, mango pie, yes. That's got a great story. We had a sister living with us here, was studying at Albertus. She's a Marinol sister, and she's from Tanzania. But she had been a missionary in Bolivia, where they had an abundance of mangoes. And for her birthday, she wanted a mango pie. I hardly knew what a mango was, let alone make a mango pie. So I went on and got a recipe for a mango pie and found out that it's very similar to making a peach pie. It kind of feels like a peach, and so I followed the recipe and did the same things, a lot more cinnamon and sugar, and oh, they are really wonderful, right? I think so too. Okay, now here's the part that I really don't want it to mess up. And that looks good. I've done a lot of pies where it tears, and I just patch it.
Okay.
And then the more you do it, the better it gets. So this turned out really well, and I'm going to kind of pinch up the edges here. Okay, so I have it all on here, kind of pinched around the edges. It's not perfect, but I think it'll look nice. And then I just give it some little air holes. And then I have just a little half and half here, and I brush it on to help the browning process. But that all depends on your oven. And I sprinkle just a little bit of sugar on the top.
Okay.
Well, here it is. It's ready to go into the oven. I've cleaned up, which is another part of working in the kitchen, is cleaning up. And I just put it in here at 375 for 50 minutes. And so we'll get back to you when it comes out and see what it looks like.
Ooh, here comes the pie.
I'm just going to check it. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes.
And in the meantime, Julie's making shrimp.
Oh, shrimp, and the dishes are being done, and you're taking care of all the rest of it.
Ready.
Okay, now we're ready to take it out of the oven.
My goodness, that looks gorgeous.
And Nina, is this just what the doctor ordered?
Absolutely.
This is always a challenge, getting the first piece out, but it looks great.